Hello and welcome to this episode of Bake It Up a Notch. I'm Erin Jeanne McDowell and I am in the very busy Food 52 test kitchens where today we are talking about all things stuffed breads. In fact, in this episode, we're going to be talking about some of my most favorites. We're going to be talking Runza. We're going to be talking Bierock. We're going to be talking Kolache or Kolache. We're going to be talking Klobanesk. We're going to talk about so many different things, including why do those all have such different names? Are they the same thing? Where do they come from? We're going to learn how to identify them. We're going to learn how to make the doughs. We're going to talk about the most delicious fillings and ways to get creative with them. And as always, we're going to talk about where things could go wrong and how to fix it. So let's get baking. The origins of the word Runza are German, but the pastry widely known by this name today has origins in the Midwest, specifically Nebraska and its neighboring states. In fact, in the state of Nebraska, there's actually a chain restaurant known as Runza that serves these famous sandwiches. And because I grew up in a nearby state of Kansas, I grew up even going to that restaurant and eating delicious Runza all the time. Truly, it's one of my favorites. You can kind of think of it as an all-in-one sandwich, where the filling is fully enclosed inside. The Runza is also adjacent to another pastry, sometimes known as the Bierock. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later and make it even in this episode, but the main differences are regionality and shape. The Runza is typically sort of an oblong, sort of shaped like a hoagie roll, while the Bierock is typically round. Let's start by making the dough. We're going to combine our ingredients together in our stand mixer. I have it fitted with the dough hook attachment. I've warmed up my milk to around 110 degrees Fahrenheit. You can do this on the stovetop or you can do it in a microwave as long as your milk is in a microwave-safe container. So I'm going to start with my all-purpose flour. I also have a small amount of sugar. This is not to sweeten the dough per se, it's to help keep it tender and soft. It also helps it brown so beautifully, which is one of the many reasons why we don't necessarily want to leave it out of this recipe. I'm also going to add some fine sea salt and our instant yeast. Let's give that just a quick mix together to combine. Now we can add sort of our other ingredients. We have a little bit of room temperature butter. We've got our nice warm milk. And we have 1 large egg and 1 egg yolk. This is not a double yolk situation going on here. We're going to mix the dough on low speed for 4 minutes, then we'll raise it to medium speed and mix it for 2 minutes more. We know that the dough is looking good because it's fairly smooth. It still has a little bit of shagginess to it, but it's come together as one uniform portion of dough. And it's fairly smooth. It's done the pickup stage. Our bowl is almost entirely clean. I'm just going to kind of form it into a ball here and put it into a bowl that allows for it to expand to be almost double in size. We'll cover this with some greased plastic wrap or a clean kitchen towel and let it rise in a warm place until it reaches that kind of double in size mark and definitely looks visibly puffy. This should take about 45 minutes to 1 hour. Next, we're going to make Bierock. The Bierock uses the exact same dough as the Runza. We're just going to shape it differently and use a different filling. The next pastry we are going to make are some Kolache and some Klobanesk. Now, these use a slightly different dough than the Runza and Bierock. It just has slightly different enrichments, a little bit more butter, a little less sugar, plus the addition of some dry milk to keep it soft. But it's mixed the exact same way. We're basically going to warm the milk, melt the butter, mix everything else in the mixer all at once until it forms a nice smooth dough. So they're basically the same doughs. They just have slightly different ratios. This one has 2 eggs instead of 1 egg and 1 yolk. There's a little bit more sugar, but otherwise they are soft, buttery, fluffy doughs. This is looking great. You can see that this is a little bit stickier than the Runza dough, and that's just because, like I said, it's more highly enriched, has a little bit more of some of the ingredients, but while all of these stuffed breads have slight regional differences, they all at the core are the same. A beautiful, soft, golden brown, slightly buttery dough with some kind of amazing filling. So I like to be able to talk about some of the different regional kinds, and this Kolache and Klobanesk dough is going to be so good. Let's put it in the bowl and let it rise. While our runza dough is rising, let's make the very yummy filling. We're gonna start by putting a little bit of olive oil and also some butter into a skillet. This is gonna be a particularly great skillet for really browning our meat well. It's also going to do a really fast, efficient job of cooking our cabbage and onions because we really want that cabbage to cook down and get really, really soft and tender. Ooh, yeah, listen to that sizzle. This stainless steel skillet does a great job of cooking things really evenly and efficiently. And it's gonna do a fast job of cooking down this cabbage. We really want it to wilt so that it is super tender. And I'm already loving the smell of this. Once we add the onions, it's gonna start smelling like the ultimate comfort food. All right, the cabbage is really starting to look nice and soft and wilted. So let's add our onions to it. Keep cooking until they are also soft and looking pretty translucent, 8 to 10 minutes more. When I add the onions, I like to also season with salt and pepper at this point because the salt will help to start to pull some moisture out of the onions, help them start to cook down, break down, get tender a little bit faster. All right, let's go ahead and put these into a bowl. Save it for later, start to let it cool down. It's very hard to brown the meat the way we're gonna want to with all of these delicious vegetables still in the pan. So let's add a little more oil to the pan. We'll add our ground beef. We'll brown the beef really well, then we're gonna add some seasonings like Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, onion powder, and some smoked paprika just to season it up. Also, of course, some more salt and pepper. Once all this beef is really nice and browned, we'll add it back in with those cabbage and onions, and we're gonna stir in some cheese too. And the whole thing is just gonna become one delicious, yummy, cheeseburgery sort of mixture. It's gonna be so good. This filling is inspired by queso fundido, so it's gonna be a combination of Oaxaca cheese and delicious cooked chorizo, spiked with a ton of scallions and some garlic. This is obviously not a traditional Bierock filling, but that's the whole idea. You can really make these delicious stuffed breads with so many different things, and this is one of my personal favorites. This one always bakes up so good, and people eat them up in minutes after they get baked. So I've got kind of a nice hot non-stick skillet here. That's gonna do a really great job of cooking my chorizo. I've got it kind of crumbled already. I'm gonna add it to the hot pan. And I do also have a slotted spoon handy because depending on what kind of chorizo you're using, it can be particularly fatty, and we want to drain it off of some of that fat if there is too much, just because we don't want all of that to end up sogging down the inside of our bread, especially not when we're adding a whole bunch of cheese into this mix later on too. So I'll cook this over medium-high heat until it's nice and browned. Then I'm gonna turn off the heat, fold in all my scallions and garlic, just so I can get that smell going a little bit. Then later, we'll combine it with the Oaxaca to stuff into our Bierock. It's gonna be so good. For our Kolache and Klobanesk filling, I wanted to do something sausage and peppers inspired. So we're gonna use some cooked sausages. You can use any kind of sausages that you really love. You can cook them on the grill, you can cook them in the oven, you can cook them in a pan. Whatever you want to do, go ahead and cook those, let them cool down, have them ready. But I want to make a little bit of like an onion and pepper kind of jammy situation. So we'll start with some olive oil and a little bit of butter because, you know, let's add our peppers and onions. This is looking so beautiful. The peppers are tender, the onions are tender. It smells amazing with that garlic in there. And most of the vinegar has kind of evaporated off, absorbing into that pepper onion mixture. So really we just need this to cool down now. We don't want to be assembling this dough with a warm filling inside. Plus it's going to warm back up when it hits the oven. Let's start shaping our runza. I'm so excited. I'm gonna start by flouring my work surface a little bit because we need to divide our dough. I'm gonna turn out the dough. That just is perfectly bowl shaped. Turn out my dough onto my work surface, and we wanna divide this into 9 even pieces. So to do that, I usually kind of start by making it into a bit of a square, but we can weigh them. They'll be about 100 grams each. So when you're shaping runza, you can kind of do this a few different ways. I just typically like to do it by hand, but I do have a rolling pin kind of nearby here because I think some people might find it easier to roll out the dough instead of just pressing it with their hands, especially if you want to get that nice even coverage. It's sort of up to you. I like the kind of rustic nature of filling it with my hands a little bit too. It just speaks to me on the Runza level, but you can really do it either way. So once we get our dough portioned, we're going to sort of flatten it into a rectangular shape. We're going for about 4 by 5 inches. And the main thing is to try to get it so that we're gonna have an even layer of dough to filling. We really want that filling in the center, and then we want it surrounded by an equal kind of quantity of the dough. Okay, we've got our Runza dough divided. I also have a little bit of flour, just in case I'm kneading it while I'm working with the dough to prevent it from sticking. And I have a little dish of water, because when you're assembling your Runza, you can always use a little bit of water to help make sure the dough is sealed and that that filling is sealed inside. So again, let's check. We're already almost there, which is so great. But this is why I was saying, I find just pressing it out with my fingers is enough, but if you want to, you can also do a little bit of rolling, just like this. Help flatten it and get it just where you want. We're looking for about 4 by 5. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna scoop about a heaping 1/4 cup of the prepared filling. This filling has completely cooled down. It's got all of that ground beef, the cabbage, the onions, the shredded cheese, and I wanna do a heaping 1/4 cup. For those of you that don't know, a most standard size ice cream scoop is usually right around a 1/4 cup, but you can use that, you can use your 1/4 cup measure, you can also just eyeball it. We just wanna make sure we have a pretty generous amount of filling, because what is a stuffed bread without lots of stuffing? I ask you. We basically wanna fill it as much as we can without it becoming difficult for us to enclose it. Once we get that filling inside, we're just gonna start working to stretch the dough around to encase it. You can squish the filling a little bit more in to help make that happen. Actually, I usually like to start with the longer sides first. So I'll kind of stretch those out and bring them in. And you can even kind of press the dough at the edges onto the other dough. This is where you could bring in that little bit of water just to help secure it. Then we'll stretch the other long side over, and we really want to make sure we're encasing it fully. It's looking good, looking good. Then we'll just take these little end pieces and we will kind of fold them up over. So the ends are going to be a little bit doughier, and that's kind of to be expected. That's just the nature of the Runza, or this particular shape. And that's what I like about the Runza, is that it is sort of shaped like this little adorable, sweet little rectangle with all that filling wrapped inside. And when it comes out, it sort of ends up looking like one long sandwich bun. Once you finish shaping it, you're gonna wanna put your Runza onto a parchment-lined baking sheet, seam side down. That's gonna give it the best chance of staying sealed, as well as all of that good, careful work you did to shut your tiny little Runza packet. After you've shaped all the Runza, you're gonna wanna cover them with a clean kitchen towel or some greased plastic wrap and let them rise until they're visibly puffy, 45 minutes to 1 hour. So Bierock is one of many stuffed breads that sort of comes from a long line of different baked goods, but probably originates to a certain degree with the Russian pirozhki, which is a yeasted dough containing some kind of savory or even sweet filling. And Bierock is the German adaptation of this bake that then has become very popular in areas of the United States that have large German or German descendant populations. And this is actually one of the stuffed breads in this episode that I grew up eating a lot of too, because there are a lot of German bakeries and things all throughout the Midwest. We're gonna wanna divide our dough, which is again the same dough as we used for the Runza. We'll wanna divide it into 9 even pieces. And the main thing that makes a Bierock a little bit different than the Runza is the shape. So a Bierock is typically rounded with the filling fully encased inside, sort of like a burger bun, but all of that filling and everything is already in there. You can always let it rest for a few minutes because sometimes when we pre-shape the dough like this, it can benefit from a little bit of relaxation before you start. But that's just if the dough is resisting. You know, you gotta listen to your dough. Remember that if you're trying to get the dough into a certain shape and it's resisting, you're rolling it out and it's shrinking, that usually just means it needs to relax, okay? We all need to relax a little bit, but dough especially needs it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Perfect. So let's just form each one into a little round. We've done this several times on Bake It Up a Notch before. I'll start by just sort of pressing the dough down and forming it into an approximate round shape. And then I will use the heel of my hand to round it a little bit further. And while this dough is decently firm and stiff, it will bake up to be super duper soft and fluffy and buttery and golden brown, and it's just so delicious. All right, so I've got all my little rounds of dough here, and I'm gonna start working with one at a time, pressing the dough out. And again, I have my rolling pin nearby, sort of same thing as the Runza. We just want to get it about 5 to 6 inches wide so that we have room for our filling. And I mentioned that I'm making sort of a non-traditional Bierock filling, but they can be filled with anything you want. In my savory baking book, I have a few different flavors, and one of the ones that I have is also sweet. I have sort of like a caramel apple Bierock that's so good. So you can really get creative and do lots of different things with these stuffed breads, and that's one of the many things that I like about them. This one we're going to do our cooked chorizo and all of that delicious scallion garlic mixture, and then I've got my queso Oaxaca. If you can't find the Oaxaca cheese, you can use low moisture mozz, or you can use brick cheese if you're in the Midwest. Something that is low moisture and melts really, really well. That's what we want here. So let's get a scoop of our chorizo scallion situation in the center. And then we want plenty of cheese. Amazing. Now we're going to just sort of lift all of the edges up. It's sort of like making like a giant dumpling or a bao. We're just gonna bring them all up. I sort of let them pleat like that, just like I was making a dumpling, and then pinch them all. Again, we can grab a little bit of water. We can apply some water here to make sure that we're really sealing it well. And one of the main things you want to do is be aware that you don't want any of the filling to burst through the other side, so we don't necessarily want to be squeezing the dough so much as we go to seal it that we pull that dough on the surface any further away, because the filling could start to break loose. But we also don't want to have a giant layer of dough at the bottom. We really want it to be as even as possible all around. So now I've sealed and pinched the bottom of this very, very well, and the top looks nice and round, just like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and transfer it to a parchment lined baking sheet, seam side down. And we'll just keep doing that with the rest of our dough. So kolaches or kolaches are Czech originally in origin and are very popular in certain places around the United States. There's also a different sort of regional one, also of Czech origin, but that's called a Klobanesk, and that is usually a whole sausage wrapped in pastry dough. There are lots of different ways to make kolaches. They can be sweet. I also love celebrating them as a savory pastry, so we're gonna do a riff today that allows us, with the one dough, to make both some kolache and also some Klobanesk, using sort of our sausage and peppers mixture that we made. As I mentioned before, the dough that we're using for the kolache and the Klobanesk is a little bit more enriched, so it is a little softer, a little stickier. And instead of dividing it into 9 even pieces, we're gonna divide it into 10 even pieces. Our pieces of dough are still gonna be right around 100 grams each. Another difference with the style of kolache that we're gonna make today is kolache can be fully encased, or they can be sort of open-faced. So I thought it would be fun, since we were already making Bierock, we were already making Runza, to make our kolache more open-faced this time. And that's a little bit interesting because that actually means that they need to be shaped and risen before you add the filling to them. So we let them rise a little bit, then we pile that filling on top, kind of as the final stage. So for now, to shape the kolache, all we're going to do is kind of start with the dough in a round, and I'm going to use my fingers in the center only. I'm trying to leave sort of a ridge of dough around the outside edge. You can do this on your work surface just with your fingertips. You can also kind of pick it up and rotate it like this, thinning out the center portion and leaving that edge of dough thicker. So the idea is, after we let the dough rise a little bit, all that filling is gonna go right in that center piece. So let's shape half of this dough as kolaches and also half of it as Klobanesk, so that we can see some of both. We're gonna get this to about 4 inches wide. I think we're about there. Great, so I'll go ahead and put this onto my parchment-lined baking sheet. Another thing I like to have on hand when I'm doing the open face style like this is a lightly greased measuring cup. So I've got this beautiful one right here, and I put a little nonstick spray on the base, and I can actually just press that in the center to kind of, again, help augment that shape that I just made. So I'll keep that measuring cup handy for when I do my next one here. So for our Klobanesk, we're actually gonna shape it very similar to the Runza. We're sort of gonna make a little bit of a rectangle, but we wanna make it a little bit less big. So we're going for more like 3 by 4 inches for our rectangle, and it doesn't have to be perfect. What we're going to do, you can press it out. Again, you can have your rolling pin. You can roll it out a little bit, whichever way you prefer. I think I'm already about there. Yeah, I'm actually plenty big. I'll shrink it a little bit. If you ever roll your dough too much, you can just tap it with the sides of your hands, kind of get it back in the space where you need. So what we're going to do, take a few tablespoons of our pickly pepper mixture and put that right in the base. We take a whole cooked sausage and we will place it right on top. Now, I also have some cheese in this recipe. For the Klobanesk, I kind of like to put that on the top right before baking, but if you wanted, you could put it inside with the rest of this. Just like we did for the Runza, if you want to apply a little bit of water as you go to start stretching this, that is great. We'll start stretching the edges over to encase the sausage and the peppers. Once you get the ingredients fully encased, we'll place this seam side down on the parchment-lined baking sheet and let it rise. After the kolache have risen for a little while, they're just gonna look a little bit puffy. We're going to go ahead and add our toppings to them at that point. So let's uncover. This is a little bit easier because we don't have to fully encase. We're gonna do the open face style, so we can just drop a scoop of our pepper mixture into each. Oh, it smells so good. It's pickly, it's garlicky, oniony, peppery. And then I've sliced the sausages. You can kind of do this however you like. One time I kind of sliced them lengthwise and kind of arranged them in little half circles. Today I just sliced them into rounds, and I'll just sort of arrange them on the surface. That way you're gonna get little sausagey kind of bites as you bite into each kolache. So we'll just arrange some sausage pieces on each one. And as I'm like arranging and smelling all this delicious sausage, I'm just thinking there's so many possibilities with these kinds of stuffed breads. So please let me know in the comments what ideas you're having. Maybe you have a favorite dish that you think you could turn into a stuffed bread. It could be a Runza, it could be a Bierock, it could be a kolache. I wanna know what you're thinking. Give me some more ideas. All right, this is looking great. Also, before we finish, if we want to add a little egg wash to the edge, but these are pretty much going to be ready to go into the oven. I cannot wait to start baking all our stuffed breads. Just going to put a little pile of cheese on top of each of these. That's what I'm always thinking of when I think of sausage and peppers, is like I'm thinking of a sausage and pepper sandwich. Maybe there's a little cheese in there too. So a little bit of cheese right on top. I'll save some of that shredded cheese to put on top of our Klobanesk when they're ready to go into the oven. Now it's time to start baking all of our stuffed breads. The Runzas bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes until they're golden brown. The Bierock bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 to 30 minutes. The Kolaches and Klobanesk bake at 350 degrees for 22 to 25 minutes. Stuffed breads like these actually keep really well, freeze well, and even refresh and reheat well. To store the baked pastries, let them cool completely, and then either store them in an airtight container or wrap them tightly in plastic wrap or beeswax wrap. You definitely want to reduce their exposure to air, as these breads can stale rapidly once that process begins. But they'll keep in the refrigerator for up to 2 days. Tightly wrapped, they can be kept in the freezer for up to 2 months. Thaw them overnight in the refrigerator before refreshing or reheating your pastries. These pastries can be reheated in the microwave, oven, or toaster oven, depending on what you feel like. To reheat in the oven or toaster oven, wrap the pastry in foil and place it at 350 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes, which should be enough to warm the dough and the filling inside. To reheat the pastry in the microwave, and trust me on this, wrap it loosely in a lightly damp paper towel and microwave it for 1 to 2 minutes. That little bit of moisture in the paper towel will add some steam and help to refresh the dough, as well as warming the filling inside it. The most common mistake when it comes to these kinds of stuffed breads really comes down to the shaping. Sometimes different shaping mistakes are really the ones that we're gonna notice the most after baking, but again, don't be discouraged. They usually don't mean the bread is any less delicious. If the dough isn't even, you may end up with portions of your pastry that are doughier and don't have as much filling in them. Again, this isn't really a problem so much as something you can work on and perfect the more you make these yummy pastries. Poorly sealed pastries can also sometimes leak in the oven, which I mentioned earlier. You can also have issues where the dough tears because it gets a little bit too thin, and then you kind of expose some of the filling on the surface or the side. This isn't the end of the world. They're usually still delicious, but anywhere that filling leaks out can also make the dough around it a little bit soggy. When the filling stays inside, so does the moisture of whatever you're wrapping in dough. But when it starts to come out, it has a tendency to sog the dough around it, as well as, of course, giving you a wonky shape, a little bit of an uneven total bake. So using a little bit of water or even egg wash when you're sealing the pastries is really the best way to help this, and just taking care to really pinch and seal those edges. When an explosion does happen in the oven, we can just enjoy it. We can take that as our little chef snack. No harm, no foul. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Bake It Up a Notch, where we made delicious runza. We made some Bierock, Kolache, Kolache, and Klobanesk. As always, all of these delicious recipes are available on food52.com, or you can snag them in the video description below. And if this episode inspires you to bake your own stuffed breads, please, please, please use hashtag #BakeItUpANotch. Leave us a comment here on YouTube. I love to know what you're making in your own kitchens. As I'm getting ready to dive into some of these tasty, savory breads, I want to wish you, until next time, lots of happy baking. If you loved this episode, you might also love another episode about some delicious, savory, stuffed bread adjacent things, aka calzones, strombolis, rolls. It's one of my favorite, very cheesy episodes. Check it out.